I still can't believe how fast things spiraled. 1 minute, I was sitting at my desk grinding through another report, the hum of the office filling my ears, coffee in hand, earbuds in, thinking about dinner plans or maybe just scrolling Twitter during downtime. The next, I walk up to the security door and my badge doesn't work. At first, I thought I'd swiped wrong. Twice. 3 times. Nada. Panic started knotting in my stomach because this wasn't normal. My access badge never failed. I glanced at the small digital display by the door. Access denied. I muttered under my breath. What the actual hell? I dialed my manager, Greg, thinking it might be some IT fluke. When he picked up, I noticed the faint smirk in his voice immediately. "Morning, Kyle," he said, like he had all the time in the world. "Company's restructuring. You'll want to pack up your stuff. Kyle's taking over your role. By noon. HR sent you the memo, right?" I froze. For a second, my brain just short-circuited. Kyle. My coworker Kyle. The guy who'd spent more time gossiping in the break room than actually running analyses correctly. The guy who bragged about working the system whenever he could cut corners. Him, taking my role? HR had indeed emailed me, but the words were formal, almost polite, in a cold, antiseptic way. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance. Don't cause a scene." That line alone made my blood boil. Don't cause a scene. Like I'd walk quietly while someone else profited off my work. Like I was replaceable. Like I wasn't the one who had closed 3 major projects in the past quarter, the one who stayed late, who triple-checked every report, who caught the errors everyone else missed. I left my desk slowly, trying not to flare up, but my mind was racing. How had I been blindsided this badly? Kyle, of all people, had never been competent enough to handle this role. And yet, here we were. Lunch felt surreal. I grabbed a sandwich from the deli down the street and scrolled LinkedIn to distract myself. That's when I saw it. Kyle's post. Big smile, hands in some fake victory pose, captioned, "Honored to take over as lead analyst." Sometimes you have to clear dead weight to make room for growth. Dead weight. Me. I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling of the little cafe. Everyone else was eating, chatting, scrolling. None of them knew what had just happened to me. None of them knew that in a few hours, I'd be jobless if I didn't act. At that moment, I realized the truth. Nobody was coming to save me. Not Greg, not HR, not any of the execs who nodded at me in meetings like I mattered. If I wanted justice, I had to handle it myself. And not with petty email complaints or a whisper to HR. No, this had to be something they couldn't ignore. I went home that night and opened my laptop. I had been quietly documenting things for months, not just for my own records, but because something about Kyle always felt off. Reports that didn't add up, emails he sent with numbers that contradicted our internal database, side chats bragging about insider trades, screenshots he'd foolishly saved himself in brag groups thinking nobody would see. It took hours to compile, but I wasn't about to stop. Each folder I organized, every proof I attached, made me feel a little lighter, a little more in control. By 3 a.m., I had a zipped archive big enough to make the board sit up straight in shock. I double-checked every file, every screenshot. There was no way they could claim ignorance. Not this time. I hit send. The target list was precise. The board, the compliance department, legal counsel. My personal email, not work, no trail back to me in the corporate system. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but oddly calm. It was done. No waiting, no politicking. Just truth in its rawest, undeniable form. By the time I got back to my apartment later that morning to grab a quick breakfast, my phone was already blowing up. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, emails flooding in from HR and security. The notification that made me grin, though, was the security alert at my old office. Kyle escorted out of the building. I watched the news updates roll in. A small regional business outlet had picked up whispers of an SEC investigation into insider trading at the firm. My inbox exploded with panicked messages. And then, the call from Greg. What did you do?" His voice was shaking, almost unrecognizable. "The SEC's here. HR, they're melting down. Tell me this isn't real." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Calmly, I replied, "Dead weight floats until it doesn't." And that was it. No yelling, no justification, no satisfaction in gloating. Just the truth hitting them harder than any email, any complaint, any meeting could have. Sitting back in my chair, I realized something. It wasn't revenge that drove me. It was validation, recognition of my work, my integrity, my intelligence. They'd underestimated me, ignored me, written me off, and that had been their fatal mistake. By the time I went back to the office a week later, my role wasn't just restored. I'd been promoted into a position with more autonomy than I'd imagined possible. Kyle, gone. Greg, silent and cautious. HR, sweating behind closed doors. I didn't celebrate. I just got back to work. It felt different this time. They knew now that I wasn't someone you pushed around, that compliance wasn't a joke, that integrity actually mattered. And me? I finally felt like I had leveled the playing field. The morning after I sent the zip file was chaos in slow motion. I got to the office around 8:15, expecting the usual hum of early arrivals and the quiet tapping of keyboards. Instead, there were whispers everywhere, side glances, people huddled by their desks with phones pressed to ears. The security guard at the lobby barely let me in before muttering something about board-level visits and SEC vans outside. I didn't panic. I just nodded, swiped my badge, still works, and made my way to the office. People were watching me now, but not the usual, hey, what's up, glance. Their expressions were sharp, cautious. I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. By 8:30, I got a call from HR. I usually ignored these calls, but this one made me pause. Kyle, sorry, my name. You need to come to the conference room immediately, the HR manager stammered. Her voice was low, tight with panic. The board, they're here. They need to talk to you. I grabbed my laptop bag and walked over. My coworkers' stares followed me, some nervous, some wide-eyed. You could tell a lot of them had suspected Kyle for months, but never had the proof. And now, apparently, the proof was in front of everyone at the top. When I entered the conference room, the tension was palpable. 5 board members, the CEO, and the head of compliance were all sitting around the long table. Kyle wasn't there, at least, not yet. I could tell the absence of his smug face was already disorienting them. Sit down, said the CEO, voice controlled but icy. We've reviewed the material you sent. I nodded, casually placing my bag on the floor. I wasn't sure why I even felt the need to act calm, but it was automatic at this point. Years in the corporate grind had trained me for this. You've uncovered multiple incidents of falsified reporting, unauthorized insider communications, and potential market manipulation, she continued. Can you walk us through your findings? I leaned back slightly, took a breath, and laid it out as clearly as possible. Numbers, screenshots, emails, every piece meticulously documented. The board members nodded, taking notes, exchanging glances. It was surreal to watch the people who ignored me, who dismissed my concerns, actually listen and process the facts. Halfway through, I noticed a commotion outside the conference room window. Security was escorting someone in, hands cuffed. It was Kyle. His face was pale, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish. He tried to mouth something, but the SEC agent behind him silenced him with a single, firm gesture. The room went silent for a few beats. Kyle, who had strutted into work like he owned the place, was now walked in like he'd already lost everything. I felt no gloating in me. Not yet. Just a strange, cold satisfaction. The board went over everything again, this time slower, more meticulously. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They had trusted Kyle, promoted him, ignored the red flags. Now they were realizing how badly they'd miscalculated. HR kept stealing glances at me, whispering to themselves, probably debating whether to rescind my severance notice or if they even could. Greg, my former manager, hovered at the back of the room, trying to mask panic with a forced composure that failed spectacularly. At one point, the CEO looked directly at me. We want you to stay with the company. Permanently. You'll have full authority to review all operations for the next quarter. And we owe you an apology. I nodded, voice steady. Thank you. But let's make sure the apology is backed by action. I want systems changed. Reporting clarified. No more dead weight being promoted over merit. The board members shuffled papers, murmuring agreements. Greg looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Kyle was then taken to a separate room to give his statement. From what I heard later, the SEC was asking him about everything. Insider trades, falsified reports, group chats, the works. His smug, untouchable persona had evaporated in a matter of hours. The guy who posted about clearing dead weight, now couldn't even defend himself in front of the authorities. Meanwhile, the office's social dynamics were shifting fast. People who had been indifferent to me suddenly approached with awkward smiles, whispered congratulations. I didn't mind the recognition, but I wasn't in it for that. I had spent months building credibility, documenting facts, covering for incompetence. The satisfaction came from justice finally catching up. By the end of the day, Kyle was officially suspended. HR was drafting legal documents. The compliance team was working with the SEC, and Greg, well, he stopped trying to make small talk. Even casual emails to me were careful, clipped, professional. I sat back at my desk, opened my laptop, and started reviewing ongoing reports. Work never really stops, even when corporate scandals hit. But the difference now? People were actually listening. Systems were being audited. And for the first time, I felt like my role wasn't just about crunching numbers. It was about protecting integrity, making sure the company didn't crumble because someone wanted to cut corners. Late that evening, I got a message from a coworker I barely knew. "You just saved us all from Kyle. Seriously. Don't even think about leaving." I smiled to myself. I wasn't a hero, not in the flashy sense. I was just someone who refused to be pushed aside, who refused to watch incompetence and corruption take over, who refused to stay silent. And that, I realized, was the real power. Not the files I sent, not the SEC call, not even Kyle getting walked out in handcuffs. It was that feeling of taking control when everyone else thought they could write my story for me. By the time I left the office, lights dimming around me, I knew things would never be the same. The company had changed. The people had changed. And I had proven that if you wait, if you plan, if you execute with precision, dead weight really doesn't float forever. The next few days felt like I was living in slow motion inside someone else's nightmare. The SEC investigation hit the office like a Category 5 storm. Agents everywhere, flashing badges, poking through desks, laptops, servers, like they were excavating some corporate archaeological dig for fraud. People who had shrugged off missing numbers suddenly started sweating bullets. And Kyle? Kyle was nowhere to be seen except in whispered references and panicked emails. I sat in my office chair staring at my screen, coffee in one hand, half-heartedly scrolling the SEC portal updates, realizing just how much impact one person's negligence, or, more accurately, one person's malice, could have on an entire company. It wasn't just the numbers he'd fudged, it was the trust, the credibility, the reputation. And for months, everyone had looked the other way. Everyone except me. I kept getting calls from the legal team, mostly confirming they had everything they needed from the zip file I'd sent. I didn't answer most of them. I was busy watching the dominoes fall. Emails popped up from compliance requesting clarifications, from HR demanding status updates on who had access to what, from the board asking me to do walkthroughs of the reports I'd compiled. Every interaction was tense. Every conversation a reminder that I'd set something irreversible in motion. Around mid-morning, Greg called me. His voice was low, tight. "We need to talk, privately. Now." I sighed, walking down the hall to his office, noting the wary glances from coworkers. Everyone was aware something major had happened, but nobody knew exactly what. Greg looked like a ghost in his own office, papers stacked around him like barriers he hoped would shield him from reality. You're insane," he said before I could even sit down. "Do you realize what you just unleashed?" Kyle screwed. "Yeah, but the board, HR, the SEC? You've painted a target on yourself." I sat, hands folded calmly. "Do you realize how many red flags you ignored? How many warnings were buried because Kyle played office politics better than he did his job?" Greg's hands trembled slightly. "Yeah, but you didn't have to expose it all at once. There could have been a quieter way." I shook my head. A quieter way wouldn't have stopped him from walking over me, from posting on LinkedIn about clearing dead weight. I'm not playing their games anymore. I'm done letting people like him manipulate everything while I sit by. Done. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, realizing I wasn't backing down, that nothing he said could make me feel guilty for exposing fraud. Back at my desk, my inbox exploded again. Kyle's LinkedIn post had been taken down, replaced with a generic "on leave" statement from HR. But the chatter had already leaked externally. By lunchtime, whispers of the investigation had made their way onto finance and industry forums, people speculating about SEC action and insider trading allegations. It was surreal seeing a guy I'd shared breakroom coffee with become an almost instantaneous case study in corporate ruin. The office atmosphere shifted. People who used to ignore me were suddenly cautious, polite, sometimes even openly grateful. Not that I needed gratitude. I didn't do this for applause. But it was undeniable that my influence in the office had multiplied overnight. Meetings went differently now. My emails carried weight. My observations were treated as authority. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a kind of clarity. That moment when you know that integrity matters more than popularity, more than loyalty to incompetence. By the second day of the SEC presence, Kyle's digital footprint had been dissected. Chat logs, email chains, screenshots of falsified reports, everything pointed back to him. And the more the agents dug, the worse it got for him. I had kept my own records meticulously, and they were exactly what they needed to close the gaps he'd tried to exploit. Watching the process unfold was oddly therapeutic, like I'd been holding back a flood and finally opened the valve at just the right time. HR and legal were constantly hovering, desperate to keep me aligned with SEC requests, making me feel simultaneously in control and on edge. I realized that my every action now had consequences far beyond my own career. One wrong move, and the company could implode, or worse, I could be implicated somehow if the agents decided to look deeper. But I stayed calm, walking the line between transparency and caution. Late that afternoon, the first public statement went out. Kyle had been suspended pending investigation. The company reassured shareholders that internal controls were being strengthened. Everyone in the office was watching the news updates like stock tickers. Social media was buzzing with speculation. I stayed silent. I didn't post. I didn't comment. My work wasn't about drama. It was about truth. By the end of the day, my role in the investigation was solidified. The board had officially granted me oversight authority to verify ongoing reports, implement auditing procedures, and liaise with compliance directly. Greg stayed silent, hovering in my peripheral vision like a shadow of his former authority. HR was adjusting quickly, forced to recognize that I wasn't someone to manipulate or sideline. As I left the office that night, the building eerily quiet except for the hum of cleaning staff, I realized just how much had changed. Kyle wasn't just facing internal discipline. He was staring down a career-ending investigation. The office hierarchy had shifted, and for the first time in months, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced since being blindsided by that access badge denial. I had learned something crucial. Patience, preparation, and meticulous attention to detail could tip the scales. Justice wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't flashy, but it was inevitable if you did the work and waited for the right moment. I walked to my car, hands in my pockets, city lights reflecting off the hood. Tomorrow, the SEC would dig deeper. Kyle would continue unraveling. The office would adjust to a new reality, one where accountability actually mattered. And me? I was ready for it all. By the fourth day, the office felt like a war zone frozen in time. People were walking on eggshells, whispering in corners, checking emails obsessively, and avoiding eye contact with anyone who might have been too close to Kyle. It was surreal. The guy who had strutted around like he owned the place was now a ghost in everyone's mind, replaced by a tension you could almost touch. I came in early, as usual, but the elevator ride up was different. Normally, coworkers would chatter about weekend plans, Netflix, or the latest office gossip. Today, silence. A few glanced at me, their eyes wide, half in fear, half in awe. I let it slide. I didn't need validation. I just wanted the systems cleaned up, the office stabilized, and the next steps executed properly. The board had called an emergency meeting at 9 a.m., and this time I was included in the agenda. They needed me to walk them through every report, every screenshot, every chat log that had exposed Kyle. I felt a strange calm as I projected the documents onto the screen. Every manipulated spreadsheet, every falsified entry, every boastful chat from Kyle was there in front of them, crystal clear. The room went silent as the CEO scrolled through the evidence. Greg sat next to me, pale, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, trying to look engaged, but clearly struggling to reconcile months of favoritism with the undeniable truth. The legal team took notes like maniacs, and the compliance officer kept muttering, This is extensive." Halfway through the meeting, security buzzed quietly at the door. Kyle was being escorted in again, this time for a formal internal hearing in front of the board. He looked different, his confident posture gone, hands twitching, eyes darting. The smugness that had defined him for months was completely replaced by panic. I didn't even glance at him. He didn't deserve the attention. The hearing was tense. Kyle stammered, tried to blame junior staff, claimed miscommunications, but it was all unraveling in real time. The board, compliance, and legal team methodically dismantled every excuse. Every screenshot, every email, every chat log was laid bare. I realized the irony of the moment. He had spent months trying to make me look incompetent, and now his own incompetence, paired with blatant fraud, was public. I sat back, letting them handle the proceedings. My role wasn't to gloat. My role was to ensure the truth was undeniable. And it was. By midday, the results were clear. Kyle was terminated effective immediately. The company was issuing a formal statement to all employees and shareholders, and SEC investigators were going through the remaining evidence to determine if criminal charges were appropriate. His name would be associated with the scandal, his career tarnished, maybe permanently. In the office, the shift was palpable. People whispered congratulations under their breath, giving me cautious nods, but the energy was different now. There was a collective realization: merit and integrity mattered. Connections and office politics weren't enough to carry you when the house of cards collapsed. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt vindicated, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally lifted. Greg, predictably, tried to approach me after the hearing. "Look, maybe we can talk about what happened," he said, voice tentative, almost pleading. I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices, I made mine. The rest is on you." He nodded slowly, probably realizing that whatever rapport we had, it was gone. Completely gone. By mid-afternoon, the board had decided on a restructuring plan. My role was officially restored, with oversight authority over audits, reporting, and compliance checks. I now had the authority to make real changes, the kind that prevented Kyle 2.0 from emerging. The office hierarchy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. Emails came flooding in from coworkers offering support, sharing whispers they'd overheard about Kyle's fate, or asking for guidance on the new compliance procedures. I responded carefully, not because I wanted to be liked, but because I wanted systems solidified and trust rebuilt. Sitting at my desk later that evening, I reflected on the past week. The rage I'd felt when my badge was disabled, the humiliation of seeing Kyle promoted over me, the frustration of ignored warnings. It had all boiled down to preparation and patience. I had waited. I had documented. I had executed at exactly the right moment. And it had worked. By the end of the day, the office felt different. People walked taller, meetings were sharper, and I could see the fear and respect intertwined in the glances I received. Not that I wanted fear, I wanted awareness. Awareness that integrity mattered, that laziness and deceit had consequences, and that merit couldn't be ignored without repercussions. I glanced at my inbox. The SEC hadn't emailed me yet, but I knew they would. The board was looping in legal and compliance to make sure everything was airtight. For the first time in months, I felt like I was not just doing my job, but actually making a difference. As I packed up to leave, a junior analyst approached me hesitantly. Thanks," he said, voice quiet. "Seriously, you saved us from months of mistakes. If Kyle stayed, who knows what could have happened?" I nodded, offering the smallest smile. "Just keep doing your work right. That's how this office survives." Walking out of the building, city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier drizzle, I realized the real victory wasn't Kyle getting fired or the SEC investigation. It was restoring order, fairness, and accountability. It was proving to myself that patience, precision, and integrity could triumph over arrogance, deception, and favoritism. And for the first time, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, knowing that the storm had passed, the house of cards collapsed, and I had emerged not just intact, but stronger. By the start of the following week, the office had shifted from chaos to cautious equilibrium. Kyle was officially gone. The SEC had begun formal interviews and investigations, and the board had greenlighted the new reporting structures I had proposed. The difference in atmosphere was stark. Gone were the whispers of favoritism and incompetence. In their place was a kind of sober respect. People still watched me, but now it wasn't fear of my authority. It was acknowledgement of the fact that someone had finally held them accountable. I sat at my desk early Monday morning, scrolling through my inbox, watching approvals, reports, and messages accumulate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent months being sidelined, overlooked, and dismissed, and now every single department's workflow funneled through me in some way. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching the scales finally balance. Greg, predictably, was quiet. He approached my desk hesitantly, eyes downcast. I wanted to say congrats, he muttered. I didn't see it coming. Not like this. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had ignored for months, but I also didn't want to indulge him. Thank you, I said finally, voice even. Make sure the team follows the new compliance protocols. That's what matters now. He nodded, silently retreating, probably realizing that whatever camaraderie we had, it was gone. Completely gone. The junior analysts and associates treated me differently now. They asked questions, sought advice, and double-checked their own work with newfound diligence. I realized my actions had sent a message beyond Kyle and Greg. Competence, integrity, and meticulous preparation weren't just respected, they were essential. By midweek, the SEC had formally contacted me. They wanted details, clarifications, and confirmations on timelines, but every interaction was professional. I had organized my evidence meticulously, anticipated questions, and prepared explanations that left no ambiguity. For the first time, I felt completely in control of the narrative. Kyle had left a trail of incompetence and fraud so blatant that even external investigators could follow it step by step. Outside of work, I began to notice subtle changes too. Friends who had once scoffed at my long hours and obsession with details now listened when I explained how corporate governance worked. My reputation as someone who could spot errors, anticipate issues, and act decisively had grown, and not just internally. The validation wasn't about ego. It was about proof that diligence and integrity could carry more weight than politics or charm. One afternoon, as I reviewed the final reports and audit summaries, my phone buzzed. It was HR. They wanted a formal debrief on my role in exposing Kyle and whether I would stay with the company long term. I paused for a second, feeling a rare moment of reflection. I had spent so much energy preparing, documenting, and executing the plan that I hadn't really considered my own position afterward. I typed a measured reply. I would stay, provided the new reporting structures and compliance protocols were enforced. I wasn't here for blind loyalty. I was here to ensure that work, integrity, and responsibility were prioritized over shortcuts and arrogance. Later that evening, I walked past the now quiet office corridors. People were focused, heads down, work ethic sharpened. I thought about Kyle, his arrogance, his shortcuts, his LinkedIn post flaunting the deadweight line. He had underestimated not just me, but the system itself, and he had paid for it. I didn't feel triumph, exactly. I felt calm, like a storm had passed and left clarity in its wake. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, quiet, deliberate, grounded in knowing that I had acted with precision, patience, and foresight. By the end of the week, the restructuring was in full effect. I had oversight of all reporting departments. Auditing schedules were formalized, and compliance checks were running smoothly. Kyle's name had started disappearing from internal systems, replaced by reminders of proper procedures, accountability protocols, and workflow audits. It was as if the office had been cleansed of his influence entirely. I sat back in my chair one Friday evening, city lights spilling through the windows. The office was empty except for the hum of computers and the soft clatter of someone finishing last-minute reports. I thought about the past month, the panic, the betrayal, the humiliation, the planning, the execution. Every sleepless night spent compiling evidence, every careful screenshot, every time-stamped email had led to this moment. No one would forget the lessons Kyle had inadvertently taught the office. Shortcuts don't last, arrogance has consequences, and integrity isn't optional. But most importantly, no one could underestimate me again. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and let myself breathe. Not with triumph, not with vindictive joy, but with quiet, unshakable satisfaction. The company was secure, the corrupt influence removed, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and respected. As I walked to the elevator, lights dimming around me, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the most decisive victories aren't loud or flashy. Sometimes, they're quiet, deliberate, and executed with patience and precision. And when they arrive, they leave a lasting impression that no one, not even the most arrogant coworker, can ignore. I stepped out into the evening air, city buzzing around me, and for the first time in months, I felt in total control of my path forward. The storm was over. The office, the board, and even the SEC had witnessed the truth. And me? I had proven that dead weight floats only until it doesn't. And when it sinks, it takes arrogance, deceit, and incompetence with it.